Welcome to Strategic Edge, a podcast by leaders and for leaders. We're here to inform, instruct, and inspire leaders. We're going to share information about business models, about theories, but then we're also going to provide instructions. How do you apply those? How do you make them very practical? And finally, we're going to encourage you to act. My name is Ted Davis. I'll be your podcast host and your leadership coach. I have been a practitioner, a student, and a teacher of leadership now for nearly 60 years. And as my future guests and I inform, instruct, and inspire you, I encourage you to do three things. First of all, absorb what we share with you. Make it your own. Take it on. Take notes. Make it your own thoughts. Make it part of what you now believe about leadership. Number two, reflect on it. What does it mean to you? What do we affirm that you're already doing? What ideas do you pick up about how to improve? And then thirdly, we want you to commit to an action plan so you can continue to move forward. So we want you to absorb, reflect, and commit. And with that, let's start today's podcast. I am absolutely thrilled to welcome as my first guest in this podcast series, Dr. Chris Auger. Chris and I have known each other for 9 or 10 years now. We were in a cohort together working on our doctorate in strategic leadership. We graduated in 2019, having earned our doctorate degrees. And it was absolutely wonderful going through the whole program with Chris, because each week we would have to write about 6 essays, and 4 of those would be a critique of our fellow classmates' work. And I learned pretty quickly that if I wanted to have a good short article, good short dialogue, as we called them, Chris is one of the key people. So I always read his stuff first because I knew it would be good and I knew there'd be a good answer, and it kind of motivated me to do that. So, but we studied together and we got through that program. Chris is a 28-year Navy veteran. He was in the SEALs during his time in the Navy. Besides earning a doctorate in strategic leadership, he has a master's in global leadership. And for the last 12 years, he's been a professional coach. Welcome, Chris. I'm so glad to have you.
Ted, it was an honor and a gift to just be asked to be your first victim, so to speak. No, you and we have bantered about leadership for quite some time, and it's been a pleasure. You've challenged my thinking on more than one occasion. I think some of my comments today may even surprise you and cause further dialogue. But all in all, it's my pleasure being here.
Absolutely. Well, I just gave highlights that you were in the Navy for 28 years and in the SEALs specifically. Tell us a little bit more about your leadership journey.
I think it started in April of 1987. It was run out of money going to college, and financial aid didn't work out. They changed the rules. So I joined the Navy to pay for college, and that turned into taking the SEAL test, passing the SEAL entry test to get into BUDS, basic underwater demolition SEAL training, and fell in love with being in the teams. And it was a wonderful journey. I was actually enlisted for the first 12 years. I had made chief in 9 years in the SEAL community, which at that time was difficult because we didn't have our own rating. So I was an operations specialist with a SEAL badge on my chest. So a lot of my studying was right out of a book to pass my MOS or my rating tests. But was accomplished at that. But at about the 10-year mark, I looked at my bride and my daughter and realized that we might want to get well as a family. I looked at being active, and being gone 9 to 10 months out of the year wasn't conducive to keeping my family at the time. So I did jump into the reserves for about 5 years. We hit a great place, and when I got mobilized back to active duty, they invited me to come back to active duty full time. So I went back to my girls and said, hey, they're asking if I want to come back to full duty full time. And they're like, well, you love being in the SEALs and we're healthy as a family. Why not? Let's go for it. Now, they didn't know they were signing up for an 8.5-month deployment, but neither did I at the time. But that's what it turned into right out the door. But I did pick up a commission while I was in the reserves. I one day looked at a retirement pay chart and figured out that retiring as a senior officer would be a lot better than retiring as enlisted. So I jumped to the dark side and picked up a commission, and then pursued my career path through that. At the very end there, my spinal surgeon said I had put about 9 lifetimes on my spine. So he suggested that I do something else for a living after the second neck surgery. So we said okay to that, and we have reinvented ourselves. I retired, and then looking at my beautiful bride, I said I was going to go back to school. And she said, I didn't like the first 2 times you were in school. And I said, well, I'm going to have a lot of time in retirement, and I guess you can be my hobby. And she's just like, yeah, you better go back to school. Because she was not going to be my hobby in retirement. And that's when I met Ted and our cohort, and we went through the strategic leadership program there at Regent University. Great move on my part. My main reasoning for doing that was so that I could teach at the highest level. At the time, I thought my back was so far gone that online teaching was my destiny. Lo and behold, I ended up healing better than I thought. Got recruited for a not-for-profit here in Rome, Georgia, the WindShape Foundation. I worked for one of the ministries there as an executive coach. I've also been a consultant and an instructor. I kind of wear 3 hats in that perspective. And I've been working for them since about 2017, fall of 2017. And it's been a great ride there. We focus on content with experiential activities, and then a lot of dialogue and discovery. People come in not knowing what to expect, but they leave with 2 or 3 micro adjustments that they can focus on for a macro impact on their lives. So
Awesome.
that's the program side of it. On a day-to-day basis, I do executive coaching through Zoom, and I coach cross industries from Chick-fil-A to banking to veterinary hospitals. It's pretty much international. I've had a couple of coaching clients from Kenya and Egypt. So it's been a pretty broad experience.
That's absolutely awesome. Thank you for sharing. 2 things. Number 1, thank you for your service. Number 2, go Army, beat Navy.
Yeah.
Just had to throw that in. Tell me a little bit more on your leadership journey. Who were key influencers, by name if you want, but who are key influencers, and what did you learn from them?
Well, I think Kat Wazotsky, when I was at the Center for SEAL and SWIC, which is a career management for enlisted and overall leadership development for naval special warfare. So all of the SEALs, all of the support staff, and the combatant crewmen, they'll receive leadership development and training through that entity within the umbrella of naval special warfare. And Captain Steve Wazotsky was our commanding officer, and just his sense of presence, that's probably, if I could look back in my career and look at what servant leadership looked like, I'd say he modeled that well. He had a lot of other qualities and traits that we'll get to when we talk about leadership, but he's the one that gave me the premise when I asked him. I was like, what 2 key things would you recommend from your years of experience to other aspiring leaders? And he said, that's simple. Be available and be approachable. If you're those 2 things, people are going to bring you problems long before they can go nuclear. Mm-hmm. And they'll bring you challenges, and they'll come to you when they need help. And it also signifies, if they're coming to you, that there's a level of trust there.
Good.
So that was pretty key in part of my development. It's interesting. I had a lot of good leaders in naval special warfare, or not naval special warfare per se, but across the spectrum of the Navy, given all the different duty stations that I had. It's interesting. I probably know the top 5 that I wouldn't want to be like more than I know all the ones I ran into that taught me a lot about being a good leader.
I want to focus on being rather than avoiding something.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Well, so what are some of the biggest leadership challenges you faced, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I think growing up without really being taught how to lead well, you enter into the SEAL community, and one of the things that they do well in the SEAL community is you learn how to team with one another and follow really well. And then as you get promoted, you then are given leadership opportunities. And then you pull what you learned in those first two events, following and teaming, into your leadership. And that was the beginning of the type of servant leadership that you and I have kind of beat back and forth in the past. Is it's that ability to go the extra measure for those around you. And it isn't to be a yes man or to look out for anyone in particular. It's more about being fair, firm, and accountable to the individual, but then taking that and being fair, firm, and accountable to the team and the organization. Just because something might be best for the individual, if it hinders the team and the organization, then there's nothing for the individual to come back to once they receive what's given to them. So and holding people to what they say they're going to do. And it's that accountability piece, I think, is so difficult for a lot of folks.
Well, let's pursue that triad. I wasn't expecting that, but that triad of fair, firm, and accountable. I think that's a marvelous triad. Now, how did you learn about it, and how have you implemented it and taught it to others?
Well, I think it's a culmination of career in the Navy and all the education, and really just trying to articulate servant leadership in a way that is understandable and digestible. A lot of people will be fair and firm, but not on the accountability. In today's society, there's a lot of people that want to be liked more than they want to be followed. And the fair, firm, and accountable piece is holding people to what they said they would do. When we're not holding people to what they said they would do, that's permission for others to choose what they don't want to do. If you think in the aspect of, I'm a big Proverbs fan. I've been reading a proverb a day now since 2009. So whatever day of the week or whatever day of the month it is, I'll go to that proverb and read it that day. And there's a lot in there about character and leadership and modeling leadership. But if you think about parenting in some aspects, if there isn't fairness, firmness, and accountability, then it diminishes the trust with your children. And if you're not willing to hold them accountable, then that's permission for them to keep doing what they're doing. But the others that are watching then get the idea that it's okay for them to have misbehavior or not do what they said they would do. I had somebody they asked me, they go, so can you give me an example or a for instance? And I said, well, in a servant leadership world, fair, firm, and accountable, you've hired somebody, they agreed to a statement of work and a role and a responsibility. They've worked for you for a time and you notice that they are not meeting what they said they would do. You then come alongside them, redefine the expectations, re-articulate the role that they signed on for, that they agreed to, and you give them an opportunity to choose to move in a particular direction for the team, themselves, and the organization. If they choose not to move in that direction at the end of that time period, you then come alongside them very closely, shoulder to shoulder. Let me help you understand what you've signed up for, what you said you would do. Mm-hmm. We now have 90 days, and at the end of 90 days, we'll make a decision whether we'll accept your request to resign or not. You're going to fire me? No. If you choose not to move in the direction we need you to move, then we'll accept your request to resign. You're going to fire me. Let's say one more time. If you choose not to do what you said you would do, then I'm going to help you find a different bus to get on, because we need somebody in that role that is going to do what they said they would do. And if you're unwilling to choose to do what you said you would do, then we'll accept your request to resign. It's really quite simple. I mean, you really don't ever have to fire somebody unless it's something really egregious. In most instances, the accountability is going to take care of it. You're only holding them to what they said they would do.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think another cliche I've used periodically, I'm not sure where I picked it up. It's not original with me, but it was my decisions are based on your decisions. And I think that gets to what you were just saying. I'll honor your request to resign because you've not chosen your decision not to get on that path. Um, so we've talked a little bit. You've mentioned the term servant leadership.
Mhm.
Wonderful model. And I know you have studied it. We've both studied it, but you have taken it far deeper and you're a strong advocate for that model. So would you kind of describe for our audience what is the leadership model and how does someone live that out?
One of the ways that at WinShape Foundation, at WinShape Teams, that we put a package around the concept of servant leadership, it's being compelled by an unshakable desire to enrich the lives of others.
Love that. Good. Say
Now,
that one more time. Say it one more time so people really catch that.
a servant leader is someone who is compelled by the unshakable desire to enrich the lives of others. Now, if we're to encourage people, it means to give courage through words. If we're to enrich others, it's to add value. Now, the beauty of that statement from a perspective of leading, teaming, and following is I can take leadership out of that space and put teammate and say a teammate compelled by the unshakable desire to enrich the lives of others. I could put follower, a follower compelled by that unshakable desire to enrich the lives of others. As a follower, can I enrich the life of my leader, my peers? 100%. And it harkens back to what I learned coming into the SEAL community is that's what you really learned how to do. You didn't want to be the one to let your teammates down in your boat crew. And when you were the boat crew leader, you didn't want to let your boat crew down or the people above you. So it's this perpetual seeking to do your very best with excellence as a leader, as a teammate, and as a follower. Now, over the years, I've really kind of honed in on the idea of servant leadership. But in all honesty, one of the hot irons I would like to articulate has been you, Ted, is to kind of challenge my thought process on the idea of servant leadership. And I've run into some other people that are, they just say, Chris, why is it servant leadership? Why isn't it just leadership? Mm-hmm. We were both exposed to a very lengthy document done by Bruce Winston and Kathleen Patterson at Regent University, The Integrative Definition of Leadership. Great read, but it boils down to be able to influence others so that they willingly and enthusiastically expend their energy, be it physical, mental, or emotional, to move towards the organizational objectives. But if we take it back prior to that, there's really only been one perfect leader. And Jesus was a servant leader. He was a transformational leader. He was an authentic leader. He was any kind of leadership trait you want to try to pull out, he was that. At one point in the Bible, we can probably find an example of him being that with someone or something. So when we really look at it, leadership can really be, if we're pursuing leadership in how he led so perfectly that he was able to teach the 12 how to lead. Now, I ask people all the time, where do the 12 learn how to follow? And you get all kinds of crazy answers. And I was like, well, did he actually stop following his father to lead the 12? And the answer is no. Did he stop leading and following to team with them, to show them how to team with one another? So Christ actually was the model of leading, teaming, and following. And he didn't stop doing any one of them to do one of them. And if we try to mentor and model that kind of leadership of leading, teaming, and following into those around us as peers and into our next level down, we then set the next level down up to be able to model and mentor it into their peers and the next level down. And I think in a lot of instances in the coaching, I get people that, I've got a problem with my people following me. I don't know what's wrong with them. And I'm like, well, how about we start with the one in the mirror first?
Absolutely.
Because if you're not teaching them how to follow well, how do they know how to follow? Most people in today's society haven't been taught how to lead. They'll just be put in charge and they'll do something until it doesn't work, and then they'll try the next great book. But the reality is, they've not only been not taught how to lead, they've not been taught how to follow or team well. So you show me a effective leader, I'll show you somebody that also knows how to team and follow, because they're pouring that into their people just as much as they're pouring the leadership into their people.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think you and I both have been ingrained and adopted that kind of philosophy, both from our Christian faith as well as how we were raised in the service. So you in the Navy, me in the Army. But you're right. I mean, the first thing you had to learn how to do is be a follower. And then how do you work together in your squad? And it kind of just grew from there, and how to be a leader. And then we started studying, obviously, the principles and the models, and then started practicing it and getting critiqued and so forth. So I love that follow, team, and lead triads. You're full of triads this evening, and I appreciate that. So, well, is your coaching?
I'd like to go back to one point that kind of helps solidify that quite to some degrees. Is that one of your questions is what was one of the bigger leadership challenges that I had to stepping into the position of being an executive officer, being prior enlisted, driving the sled dogs, making it up through the ranks. And then when I became the XO at the Center for SEAL and SWCC, I didn't know it at the time, but I had trained my staff to show up to department head meetings unprepared, because they knew I was going to tell them what I wanted, which was a translation of what the skipper wanted, when he wanted it, how he wanted it. I mean, I was going to give it all to them. So they didn't have to think. They were just going to go do once I got done speaking. Then I got an emotional intelligence assessment and got a lot of good feedback. A lot of feedback that hurt. It smarted. But I came back to that situation from a perspective of, here I thought I was enabling my folks with the best, because I had already thought about the 9 ways to do something, and then I gave them the one that I landed on. But what I discovered is none of us is as smart as all of us. And that wasn't my role. My role as the XO was to remove obstacles that would preclude them from doing the great things that they could do. So when I took a step back, literally, and just allowed people to do what it is they were put in position to do, man, our organizations just started sailing. I mean, it was really impressive what people knew. And I never knew it because I thought I was, quote unquote, helping them by giving them the answer. The reality is allowing them to go forth and crush it, fail, bruise their knees, get up, learn, implement, re-enter into the fray.
Yeah.
That truly, if I had to say my biggest leadership challenge, it was coming face to face with the fact that I was actually the one that was in my way.
Well, it's a huge failure. A lot of young leaders make, and it's one of the most profound things that they can do. And I think that's when they do it, it's a huge step forward in the servant leadership model and many others. And I think of, as you say that, the adjective I'd use or the character trait is humility. I think that's a huge part of servant leadership. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the ability to I've grown to a point where, in my perspective, if I was to sit here and look at you, Ted, you've known me for some time, and I just look at you and go, I'm a pretty humble guy, aren't I? And naturally, I figured you'd start laughing. Well, you were until you said that, but hey, the challenge is that what if people looked at leading, teaming, and following in the same aspect?
Mhm.
What if leading, the title of being a leader or a teammate or a follower was earned because there was evidence of having led or teamed or followed well?
Right.
So if we're earning that leadership title on it, it would be arrogant for me to say that I'm a leader, in my opinion. Now, if I have evidence of leadership and the people that I actually led call me a leader, I'll take that all day long because they're the one calling me and putting that title upon me. I'm not putting it upon myself. So the same aspect of I'm pretty humble. If I have to tell somebody I'm humble, am I? That's one of my rubs with authentic leadership is that you're supposed to articulate that you're authentic. And it's like Christ didn't have to articulate he was authentic. He just was.
Right.
But others would call him authentic.
Well, I would suggest that understanding that you are humble, that you're working towards it, recognizing your character, because I think you got to kind of know where are you, good and bad. So to say that you're humble, I don't think is a boastful term, because it's a self-assessment. Now, do I behave that way? Am I consistent? And it can be verified by others. Yeah, are you or not? So I think you can be, and I learned this when I was a lieutenant colonel, actually, and I was working in a ministry there at Fort Leavenworth, and I was working with captains that were going through this course, and they were always looking up to who's a role model, and that's what I had to be was a role model for them. And one of their big questions was work-life balance, basically, is what it boiled down to at that time. And one of the things I came to learn over that period of time was that in being humble didn't mean I didn't acknowledge here's the importance of the role I'm playing, here's the attributes I have to have, and humility has got to be one of them. And what does it take? Well, and I think humility, great definition of it is, I talk about myself all the time, but I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not so good at it, and pursue that. And I think humility is listed under, is it Spears who wrote like 9 traits of a servant leader, and humility on that list?
I think so.
Yeah. So I think if it's one of the traits, and I absolutely firmly believe it is, okay, you got to know it. So if you got to know about that about yourself, are you humble or not? Well, you got to look at yourself in the mirror. And again, I'd say that if you're humble, what are you doing? You know yourself, you've got confidence in what you can do, but you're not braggadocious. You're not bringing attention
Well,
to you.
that's what I was going to say, Ted, is
Yeah.
having humility and being humble is different than me telling you I'm humble. If I have to tell you or convince you that I'm humble or I have humility, it's a bit, I mean,
I would agree with that. Yeah.
we're off the tracks
Yeah,
now.
so yeah, that'd be self-evident. It's
Can
self-evident to others. Absolutely.
and I was just explaining this to a leader the other day is that one of the aspects of in his organization that the celebration piece, he's not a big birthday guy and whatnot, and I reflected with him on a situation that I had personally. It's like for years I would go to great lengths to find the perfect gift for my wife and daughter, just so I could see their face and their elation when they opened it up and realized how much work went into seeking that perfect gift out for that time in their life. Then it would become my turn to open my gift, and I would open it up and go, yeah, neat. What's next? Well, I was truly robbing them of the opportunity to share the joy and the effort that they put into seeking a gift for me. So I equate it like this. We have to be a good gift giver, but we also have to be a good gift receiver.
Absolutely.
The example you gave for the young lieutenants, or I'm sorry, the young captains, is that those in the audience that don't know, a captain in the Navy is an 06, A captain in the Army is an O3. A lieutenant in the Navy is an O3. A lieutenant in the Army is an O1. So, but the idea being is that being able to model how to receive praise well for you and your team, recognizing that you had some hard work in that, and being able to graciously accept that in humility, but then to also shower the team with praise, because there's a lot of people that are pretty narcissistic and they'll use that as an opportunity to say, oh, it wasn't me, it was my team. And they're really very quietly robbing their team of that opportunity to see humility in action and modeled well. But it's also a deflection for somebody that tends to be a little bit more narcissistic because they're not willing to embrace the fact that, yeah, I worked pretty hard on that project too. So we don't want to discount our efforts. We just don't want those to be the only ones that others see.
Absolutely.
And back to the idea of being a good gift giver, but a good gift receiver as well. How are those we've been given charge of supposed to learn how to receive in a gracious manner with humility? I think one of your big words was magnanimous kind of way. I mean, how do they learn how to do that unless it's done for them? And then that circles us right back to the beginning. How did Christ model and mentor the behaviors into the 12 so that when he went to be with the Father, they then became the master teacher and poured that into others?
Good. Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time. And so I've got two questions. First of all, if people want to pursue an understanding of servant leadership and how they can model or live that model, any references that you would refer them to? What would your recommended reading list be?
I think I've got my top 5 books. Number one absolutely is the Bible. And then I've got 5 other books that I really enjoyed. One is a data-driven book, and it's called The Leadership Challenge by Kuze and Posner.
Good book. Excellent.
Really good book because it's so data-driven. And they've got characteristics of servant leadership, and I think they may mention it once, but if you're doing what's in that book, you're leaning in that direction of leadership with servant leadership qualities.
Right.
But Lead Like Jesus by Ken Blanchard, Phil Hodges, and Phyllis
Good
Henry.
book. Excellent.
Phenomenal book. And then there's a book by 2 PhDs, Sipe and Frick, The 7 Pillars of Servant Leadership. And that takes it and breaks it into 7 pillars with 3 sub things that you can actually take leadership and go do it with that. Good. And then another one I recently read in this past year is A Shepherd's Look at Psalm 23. Wow. And if you really want to get a really good look at servant leadership, at the great ends a shepherd goes to care for the flock. It's a beautiful analogy of what a servant leader does for his team and his people and his organization.
Good.
And he doesn't forget that there's other goals in mind. And I like that he's fair, firm, and accountable. He had one sheep that wanted to continue to do things that encouraged the other sheep to do wrong things. That sheep was sacrificed because it was teaching all the other sheep fair, firm, and accountable. He held that, it was an accountability piece. He couldn't let that sheep pull all the others astray. So the book itself is it's an easy read, but it's a really good analogy of how to actually just look at leadership. Excellent. And the great lengths that leaders take. I don't think enough of us pause and take stock in what's unseen that our leaders are doing for us. Because oftentimes it's a lot more than we're aware of.
No, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. Well, the final question, what are 3 practical steps that people should understand? What should they walk away with? What are 3 practical things you want people to do after listening to us?
Well, there's two parts to this, Ted. The first part is there's three questions I want to give the audience, and they don't have to answer those now. They can answer them later. But if you had to follow you, would you? What would cause you to follow you or not follow you? If you had to be on a team with you, would you want to be on a team with you? Again, what would cause you to want to be on that team with you or not? And if you had to lead you, would you want to lead you? And that goes to that perspective of being the best leader, teammate, and follower. We've all had the follower that was just a lot of extra grace required, and they were just a pain in the arse. And we've all been on a team that we didn't want to be with those people because they weren't teammate minded. And then we've all followed a leader that we didn't want to follow, but are we willing to go the distance to look in the mirror and ask ourselves those questions? And if we're not happy with the answer, what are we willing to do about it? And that gets to the 3 points that I wanted to make that people carry away with is, remember, the kids are always watching. They'll see what we do long before they hear what we say. So we need to model and mentor what leading, teaming, and following looks like if that's our expectation, because otherwise they're guessing. So it's really on us to create those future leaders, teammates, and followers. Be available, be approachable. Be the kind of leader that people want to bring you their challenges and get that mentorship and understanding of how to tackle it. And then back to an earlier statement that you heard me make is earn the ability to be called the leader, a teammate, and a follower.
Chris, those are three awesome things. I really appreciate your sharing those. Also, how can people get a hold of you? What's your contact information? How can they reach out to you?
Probably the easiest way would be Auger at windshape.org, where they can go to windshape.org and they can look for Windshape teams, and then they can look for some of the programs and the coaching that is available through that site.
Okay. And we'll have that contact information posted. One is when audiences see this, we'll have that on the screen. And then we'll also post it on the podcast website where people can download the meeting notes. Chris, I cannot thank you enough. This has been absolutely marvelous. And I'll definitely, if you're interested, have you back sometime and can pursue leadership.
I thoroughly enjoy the conversations that we get to have on leadership. You definitely hold me to task. You don't let me get away with anything. You don't let me slide anything in there unless I'm willing to back it up and substantiate it. So it'd be my pleasure to come back.
All right, my friend, you take care and God bless.
All right, take care.
Now I've got 3 ideas of what to share from today's podcast. So again, what I'd like for you to be able to do is take those ideas, make them your own, reflect on them. What do they mean to you? And then thirdly, commit to an action plan. Commit to actions that you can take to apply what we've talked about today. If you want help, if you want some ideas, if you want some accountability, please contact me. Contact me by sending me a text, 913-306-1499. Put podcast follow-up in the text message, and I'll get back to you within 24 hours. Thank you so much for listening today, and I'll see you on our next broadcast.